My name is Kendall, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in a quiet coffee shop, the gentle clinking of ceramic against saucers the loudest sound around me. It's a far cry from the chaotic symphony of my childhood home, where peace was a fleeting visitor and raised voices were the constant soundtrack. For years, I just thought that was normal. Every family had arguments, right? Every family had explosive outbursts that left the air thick with unspoken tension. But then I grew up, and I started noticing things. Like the way my shoulders would tense when a friend spoke to me with a sudden, soft intimacy, or how a kind whisper from a partner could make me flinch, my body bracing for an impact that never came. It was like my system was wired for a different kind of communication, a harsher frequency. The breaking point arrived a few months ago. I was at a work meeting, presenting a new project, and my boss, a genuinely calm and supportive woman, leaned in and spoke to me in a low, encouraging tone. "Kendall," she said, her voice barely above a murmur, "that's a fantastic idea. Let's develop that further." And I flinched. My whole body jerked back, a subtle, involuntary recoil, as if she'd thrown something at me. The shame that washed over me in that moment was suffocating. It wasn't just a physical reaction. It was the realization that after all these years, after moving halfway across the country, after building a life for myself, the echoes of my past still held me captive. This wasn't just a habit. It was a wound deep and unhealed. This story isn't just about the yelling. It's about what happens when the very sound of kindness feels like a threat. So, settle in, because this is my journey through the quiet storm within. Growing up, our house wasn't just a place to live, it was a battleground. My parents, bless their hearts, were two strong-willed individuals who never quite learned to coexist peacefully. Their arguments weren't just disagreements. They were theatrical performances, complete with dramatic pauses, rising crescendos of shouting, and abrupt, icy silences that were often more terrifying than the noise itself. I remember spending countless evenings huddled in my bedroom, a thin pillow pressed over my ears, trying to muffle the sounds that seeped through the walls. It wasn't always directed at me or my younger brother, Ethan. More often than not, it was directed at each other, or at the world in general, or at some invisible slight only they could perceive. But the proximity, the sheer volume, the raw emotion of it all was inescapable. I learned to interpret the nuances of their voices, to predict the trajectory of an argument before it even fully ignited. A sharp intake of breath, a sudden drop in a usually jovial tone, the quickening pace of footsteps. These were all precursors to the storm. My body learned too. It learned to brace, to tense, to become small and invisible. It was a survival mechanism, a way to navigate the turbulent waters of our home. I saw other families, the ones on TV or the few I encountered at school, and their quiet interactions felt alien. They spoke in hushed tones, they laughed without reservation, they disagreed without turning their faces red with fury. I remember thinking, are they just pretending? Is this a front? Because in my world, genuine emotion was loud, messy, and often frightening. The shift from the cacophony of my childhood home to the hushed world outside was always jarring. It was like stepping from a blaring concert into a silent library, a constant recalibration that left me feeling off-kilter and hyper-aware. High school was where the cracks in my perception truly began to show. My best friend, Sarah, came from a family that seemed to communicate solely through whispers and gentle suggestions. Her parents would offer advice with a soft smile, never a raised voice. When Sarah accidentally spilled juice on their new rug, her mom simply said, "Oh, darling, don't worry, it's just a little spill. Let's get a towel." My jaw practically hit the floor. In my house, that would have warranted a full-blown interrogation, accusations of carelessness, and a loud, exasperated sigh that could curdle milk. I remember one afternoon, Sarah was trying to explain a complex math problem to me. I was struggling, and my frustration was clear. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's okay, Kendall. Let's just break it down step by step." And I flinched. My shoulders tightened, and I subtly pulled back. Sarah, bless her kind heart, noticed. She paused, a small frown on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice still incredibly soft. I mumbled something about being tired, but inside, a knot of confusion and shame tightened in my stomach. Why did her kindness make me so uncomfortable? Why did it feel so threatening? It wasn't just Sarah. Teachers, coaches, even the kindly librarian who would recommend books to me in a hushed, reverent tone. Their gentle voices felt like a foreign language I couldn't quite decipher. My brain, accustomed to the sharp, distinct edges of shouted words, struggled to process the smooth, rounded corners of softer speech. It was as if my auditory processing system had been recalibrated to detect danger in volume, and now, the absence of that volume signaled an unknown, unsettling territory. I started to notice how I would unintentionally stiffen when someone offered a compliment in a quiet voice, or how a hushed apology would make me feel inexplicably defensive. It was a constant internal battle, my conscious mind understanding the benign nature of the interaction, while my body, with its deeply ingrained muscle memory, reacted as if preparing for an attack. The world outside my home was trying to speak to me in a gentle voice, and all I could hear was the potential for a trap. The more I encountered gentleness, the more I became aware of the stark contrast with my own upbringing, a realization that slowly, painstakingly, chipped away at the foundation of what I thought was normal. College was supposed to be my escape, a fresh start where I could shed the skin of my past. I moved to a city several states away, eager to immerse myself in a world where I could define my own peace. And for a while it worked. The dorms were noisy, but it was a different kind of noise: laughter, music, late-night conversations. It wasn't the charged silence or the explosive outbursts I was accustomed to. I even started dating, cautiously at first, then with a growing sense of hope. My first serious boyfriend, Ben, was the epitome of calm. He rarely raised his voice, even when he was genuinely upset. He preferred to talk things through, his voice dropping to a serious, measured tone when something was bothering him. That's when the true depth of my issue became terrifyingly clear. One evening, we were having a disagreement about something trivial, a misunderstanding about plans. Ben, trying to de-escalate the situation, lowered his voice. "Kendall," he said, his tone soft but firm, "I just want to understand what's going on." And it happened again. The flinch. But this time it was more pronounced. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my heart quickening, my fists clenching subtly. It was a primal response, and I hated it. Ben, who was incredibly perceptive, saw it immediately. His eyes widened slightly. "What was that?" he asked, his voice still gentle, but now laced with concern. The shame was overwhelming. How could I explain that his calm, rational tone was making my body feel like it was under attack? How could I articulate the paradox of a soothing voice triggering a fight-or-flight response? I tried to brush it off, to laugh it away, but Ben wasn't easily deterred. He gently took my hand. "Kendall," he repeated, "you flinched. Like I scared you." Tears welled up in my eyes. It was a moment of stark vulnerability, exposing a wound I had meticulously hidden, even from myself. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a quirk, it was a deeply ingrained trauma. The absence of shouting, the presence of gentle, measured tones, was activating a fear response that had been etched into my very being. The constant yelling at home hadn't just affected my hearing. It had rewired my emotional landscape, making kindness feel like an unfamiliar and potentially dangerous territory. The weight of all those unspoken words, all those suppressed emotions from my childhood, pressed down on me, making it clear that I couldn't outrun my past. The vulnerability of that moment with Ben was a turning point, a painful but necessary unveiling of the hidden scars that lingered beneath the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. After that conversation with Ben, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The flinching, the anxiety triggered by gentle voices, it was impacting my relationships, my work, my entire sense of self. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, older woman named Dr. Evelyn. In our first session, I rambled, tried to downplay it, chalk it up to just being sensitive. But Dr. Evelyn listened patiently, her voice a calm, steady presence. When I finally got to the part about flinching at gentle voices, she simply nodded, her expression empathetic. "It sounds like your nervous system learned to associate a certain intensity of sound with danger or discomfort," she explained, her voice as soft as a whisper. "And now, even the absence of that intensity, or a different kind of intensity, can trigger that old protective response." Her words were like a key unlocking a forgotten room in my mind. It wasn't about being overly sensitive. It was about a deeply ingrained trauma response. My body had been conditioned to anticipate the worst, to be on high alert for the next shout, the next argument. It made perfect sense, and yet, it was terrifying to confront. We started unpacking my childhood, layer by painful layer. The arguments, the slammed doors, the accusations, the way silence would descend like a heavy blanket after a particularly nasty fight. I remembered nights I would cry silently into my pillow, too afraid to make a sound lest it invite more conflict. I realized how much I had internalized the idea that noise equaled importance, that quiet meant something was wrong, or that I was being overlooked. The therapy sessions were tough. Sometimes Dr. Evelyn would deliberately lower her voice, speaking to me in a particularly gentle tone, and I would feel that familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to pull away. But this time I had a guide, someone who understood. She taught me grounding techniques, ways to acknowledge the physical sensation without letting it overwhelm me. She helped me understand that my reaction wasn't a flaw, but a symptom of a past that had left its mark. The unraveling of those threads, though painful, was also liberating. It was the first step towards understanding that I didn't have to live with this ingrained fear forever. Each session with Dr. Evelyn was a careful excavation, revealing not just the roots of my reactions, but also the strength I unknowingly possessed to begin the process of rebuilding. The path to healing wasn't linear. There were days when a perfectly innocent, soft-spoken comment from a colleague would still make me tense up, sending a wave of frustration through me. But now I had tools. Instead of immediately shrinking inward or becoming defensive, I'd take a deep breath, consciously reminding myself where I was, who I was with, and that I was safe. Dr. Evelyn encouraged me to actively seek out gentle voices, to expose myself to them in controlled environments, to desensitize my nervous system. I started listening to audiobooks read by narrators with soothing tones. I sought out quiet spaces like libraries or nature trails, where the ambient sounds were soft and calming. I also had a crucial conversation with Ben. I explained everything: the therapy, the trauma, the flinching. He listened with an incredible amount of patience and understanding. He admitted he had been confused by my reactions, but he never judged me. Instead, he became an active participant in my healing. He would sometimes gently point out when I flinched, not in a critical way, but to bring my attention to it. He learned to communicate with me in a way that felt safe, often using a slightly more deliberate pace in his speech, allowing me to process his words without feeling overwhelmed by their perceived softness. It was a slow, gradual process of rewiring my brain, of teaching my body that gentleness wasn't a precursor to a storm, but a sign of peace and safety. I started to notice small victories. The first time a friend spoke to me in a hushed, empathetic tone, and I didn't flinch, but instead felt a warmth spread through me. The first time Ben whispered, "I love you," and I didn't tense but melted into his embrace. These moments were profound, tiny triumphs in the larger battle against the echoes of my past. I was slowly but surely reclaiming the quiet, learning to associate it not with impending doom, but with genuine connection and calm. Embracing the quiet was more than just a personal triumph. It was a conscious choice to rewrite the narrative of my own story, one gentle interaction at a time. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning to live with it, to integrate it, and to prevent it from controlling your present. For me, that meant understanding that the flinching might always be a part of my history, a subtle scar, but it no longer defined my interactions. It no longer dictated my reactions. My relationships deepened because I was able to be truly present, no longer bracing for an invisible impact. My work improved because I could focus on the content of the message, not the perceived threat in its delivery. I started to use my experience to help others. I found myself becoming more empathetic, more attuned to the subtle cues of discomfort in others. I began volunteering at a local community center, working with children who came from troubled homes. I made a conscious effort to speak to them with unwavering gentleness, to create a space where their voices, no matter how soft, were heard and valued. It was a way of giving back, of transforming my own pain into a source of support for others who might be navigating similar silent struggles. The house where I grew up still exists, of course. I visit my parents occasionally, and sometimes the old patterns resurface. The raised voices, the familiar tension. But now I have the tools to navigate it. I can set boundaries, I can remove myself from the situation, and most importantly, I can remind myself that their behavior is a reflection of their own struggles, not a commentary on my worth. My body still registers the intensity, but my mind no longer reacts with the same visceral fear. It's like the volume knob has been turned down, and I can choose to filter out the noise. I'm no longer trapped in the echo chamber of my past. The journey has been long and challenging, but the quiet that now fills my life is a testament to the strength found in confronting the past and embracing a future defined by gentle understanding. Today, I'm still Kendall, 32 years old, but the landscape of my inner world is vastly different. The coffee shop is still quiet, But now the gentle sounds are a comfort, not a source of anxiety. My parents, though still prone to their loud moments, are learning too slowly to communicate in ways that are less jarring. My brother, Ethan, and I have a bond strengthened by our shared past, and we often talk about the subtle ways our upbringing shaped us. We laugh about it sometimes, the absurdity of our ingrained reactions, but there's an underlying understanding and acceptance. The main lesson I've learned is this: healing isn't about forgetting, but about relearning. It's about recognizing the patterns that were laid down in childhood and consciously choosing to forge new ones. It's about understanding that your past doesn't have to dictate your present or your future. If you've ever felt that inexplicable flinch, that surge of anxiety when someone speaks gently, know that you're not alone. Your body isn't betraying you. It's protecting you in the only way it knows how, based on old programming. But you have the power to rewrite that code. Seek help, lean on those who offer gentle support, and be patient with yourself. The journey is long, but the reward of finding peace in the quiet, of embracing kindness without fear, is immeasurable. Remember, the quiet doesn't have to be a threat. It can be your sanctuary, a space where you can finally breathe, truly heard and truly seen.